Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today in this session we are going to talk in our series on inequality and difference. Friends, as you know that in our previous session we elaborately talked on poverty and social exclusion, and as promised, here we are again to talk more on poverty and social exclusion. This is the second lecture where we are going to get in-depth knowledge once again, and for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Vip. Dr. Shruti Vip is an eminent professor, and through her we always try to give you more and more of knowledge. Dr. Shruti Vip is assistant professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Dr. Vip's immense experience as well as his keen interest to give you more always help us out in understanding different topics in detail. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Shruti Vip on today's lecture on today's topic, then do call us through our toll-free number. Our number is 1800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1800-110-430. Dear friends, you are requested to call in the last 10 minutes of the lecture, as well as you are asked to ask questions relevant to the topic only. Now I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Shruti Vip, once again. Hello ma'am, welcome to the lecture.
Hello Gitika, thanks a lot for giving me this wonderful opportunity. And welcome back friends. We were discussing the topic poverty and social exclusion, and in the last lecture I had discussed in detail not only the definition of poverty and social exclusion, but also how the phenomenon operates vis-a-vis various categories like STs, and in today's lecture I would be focusing on SCs and women. So these are some of the variables that I have selected, and of course the list is never ending. It is not as if it is only these three categories which are undergoing poverty and social exclusion, but for the time being I would be restricting to them. So in today's lecture we will be discussing in detail how the issue of poverty and social exclusion has impacted the lives of marginalized castes, as well as what are the gender implications of this, that is how women are impacted by poverty and exclusion. Now coming to first of all we will be discussing how this has impacted scheduled castes. Now in some of my preceding lectures also I have made a passing reference to how marginalization goes hand in hand with castes, and especially in a country like India where the caste system has been age old and it continues to have implications irrespective of various constitutional safeguards. This topic is of particular relevance. Now the belief systems still impact the outcomes in the schools, and this is of prime concern. And in fact the recent data that has come up as a result of the research that has been carried on by various educationists and sociologists also points to the same, that how the age old belief systems and prejudices that are associated with particular castes continue to have an impact on the results of marginalized caste students in the schools, and it particularly impacts their performance in the schools and other educational institutions. So then another important factor that one can talk of is how ethnographic evidence points to the isolation of SC children in the classroom, and of course there have been recent reports also as to how SC children were discriminated against not only during the midday meal schemes but also as part of the overall community building networks that were being devised in various educational institutions. So therefore the problem of exclusion continues, and inclusion still looks at a distance. So unless and until we have a deeper insight into what what operates and how it operates at the ground level, things would be difficult to change. Now, if we look at this graph that is being shown at your screens, you can see that how India has registered a change in the post primary education by caste and gender, and this basically this graph basically talks about the period from 1983 to 2005, and the calculations are based on NSS thick rounds for working age population. Now, you can easily make out from this that how there has been a steady rise, there has been a gradual rise as far as the enrollment is concerned compared to from 1983 to 2005, and this you can see not only among non-SC/ST men, but also among SC men, then non-SC, not only among non-SC/ST women, but also among SC women and ST women. So, definitely there has been an increase in enrollment, but then the differences continue to exist, and the differences are almost to the similar level as they had existed in the past. So, therefore, the enrollment among SC/ST men is much lower than non-SC/ST men, and similarly the enrollment among ST women is even lesser than the enrollment for SC women, and of course, the enrollment for non-ST/SC women is much higher than ST and SC women. So, therefore, these discrepancies continue to remain so many decades after independence also. Now, another disturbing trend that has come to light is the issue of SC entrepreneurship. While one can really point out that the discrepancies are there in education sector, whether it is primary, post primary, middle school, high school, or the higher education. Now, if we look beyond this and if we talk about employment and if we talk about entrepreneurship, then also one can see the discrepancies and the kind of exclusionary practices that continue to impact marginalized groups. So, while entrepreneurship has risen among the SC population, but still a lot needs to be done to bring them at par with rest of the groups. So, therefore, while there has been a small labor market transition for Dalit men over time, that is out of casual labor into self-employment, but then this shift has not really been huge, and also the higher levels of education that are associated with withdrawal from casual labor for all men sadly does not really exist as far as marginalized castes are concerned. The multiplied effects of caste and education point out that an increasing large number of educated SC men may be resulting in some kind of rationing of reserved and salaried jobs. So, therefore, while education among SCs is increasing and they are now better equipped to take up government jobs, but then the sad reality is that the government sector in itself is shrinking. So, therefore, there is a supply of more educated marginalized castes as compared to the demand for the same. So, therefore, an alternative is self-employment and entrepreneurship, but in this sector also they are lagging behind due to lack of social capital, a concept of Bourdieu that I had discussed in the last lecture. Now, almost half of SC employed almost half of self-employed SC men engage in manual trade, and there is very less regulation as far as this sector of economy is concerned. So, therefore, they are far more at greater risk of not only making profit, but also of sustaining themselves in whatever trades they are indulging in. So, therefore, the poor access to market and credit credit is definitely impacting their overall performance, and it is also creating hurdles in their path of progress. And here also a lot can be said about how it is important to have socio-political cultural capital, which the marginalized sections of society are definitely lagging in, especially if you compare them to the privileged sections of society. Now, there exist significant wage differentials also between SC men and other caste groups. So, in fact, almost in some cases there has been almost a 59% of the gap, of the wage gap, which cannot simply be explained by lack of education, skills, capital, etc. And wages are probably influenced by occupation more than anything else. So there are very specific kind of occupations in which SC men are focusing, and due to the lack of the right kind of education at the right kind of level and with the right kind of degrees, therefore their options continue to remain myopic, and the marginalized castes are concentrated invariably in low end jobs, in low paying jobs, and even in the public sector similar trends are to be seen. So therefore, this stereotyping has even percolated in the private sector, which otherwise is usually known as a more efficient sector, one which values meritocracy rather than anything else. So therefore, a question that arises here is as to know what is the reality and what is happening at the ground level in order to understand that why exclusion continues to exist. Now, in this phenomenon is not only unique to India. In fact, wherever exclusionary tactics have been followed in the past, they continue to have an influence in the contemporary world also. For example, various experiments that were carried on in the US, they also pointed out to similar results. For example, in US, various resumes of applicants with colored, Latino and white names were sent, and in one experiment they were sent without any reference to their names, so that people would not and their ethnicity, so that their background would not be exposed, and this was for entry level jobs. And in the second experiment, everything was openly declared, and the ethnicity also was declared, and in both the cases the responses to the applications were completely different, and this showed huge discrimination. So whenever there were applicants with names which signified that they belonged to a particular race, then they were automatically not selected. Whereas in the same applicant whose name was not exposed, whose ethnicity was not exposed, was selected. So therefore, this shows that the inherent biases continue to pervade, and they continue to impact today's fast changing global world also. Then similarly, in another experiment that has been cited by Hoff and Pandey, it was in 2004, that for India an experiment was a controlled experiment was conducted with Dalit junior high school students in a village in UP, and this involved solving mazes. So the task that was given to the students was to solve mazes, and 3 experiments were carried on. In the first, the caste of the students was not publicly revealed, so as to see what would be the results of the maze. And in the second setting, the caste of each subject was publicly announced, and in the third experiment the students were separated into high and low caste groups, and then caste of each group was revealed. Now it would be surprising again to see that no statistically significant difference in the performance was there when the caste was not known. So the students performed more or less to the similar level. But gap became apparent between achievers and non-achievers, that is those who could solve the maze and those who could not, when the caste was made salient feature, when it was publicly declared. And in fact the public announcement resulted in reduction in the average number of mazes that were solved by SC subjects by as much as 23%. So this shows that how there was a lack of confidence in the same group of students once they were indicated by their caste names, and that was made public. And this not only robbed them of their confidence, but also robbed them of their capabilities, their abilities to solve a task which they were able to perform in a much better way when they were treated at par with others. So this is the impact of socially exclusionary policies that have been prevalent. Now, the recent research in India further points out to a very subtle and to a very very strong stereotyping in private sector jobs also, and this definitely is a very sad phenomenon, because in today's world, while the public sector is shrinking and the government jobs are declining, so more and more people have to fall back on the private sector. And if these exclusionary practices find their way in private sector also, then where do the marginalized groups will go is a question that needs to be answered by all. So here again a research that was conducted by Deshpande and Newman in 2009. They found out that most of the hiring managers of the MNCs of various companies, etc., universally asked questions about family backgrounds, about the kind of belief systems that are prevalent in the families, about what the various family members are doing, and all this is being asked in a very formal kind of a setting, that is during the employment interviews. So therefore, while the non-reservation category students, that is the upper caste students, do not find these questions objectionable, rather they think that this is an opportunity for them to showcase their families' contributions and achievements and how well placed they might be, and they are very eager to offer biographies about their family members, and they are also able to connect with the with those who are taking their interviews, because they have a natural connect belonging to the professional families themselves. Whereas the Dalit students, those who are probably belonging to the first generation educated youth, they perceive a hidden agenda in details pertaining to family, in details pertaining to social status, and therefore the same questions which are welcome for the upper caste students are not really taken in very good spirit and with that kind of confidence by the marginalized caste students. And therefore what happens in the interview board is for all of us to imagine that how these marginalized caste students must be performing and what would be their inhibitions. Now, having discussed how these socially exclusionary practices have pervaded the marginalized castes, now the next category that I would be talking about in somewhat detail is women. But here again I would not be going in too much detail, because I have already conducted a series on gender and education and also women and Indian history, and you will find a lot of relevant material in those series. So I would request the students to go back to those series, and for this particular paper they must refer to the concept of patriarchy, the evolution of patriarchy, the historical relevance, the whole discourse of patriarchy, and how in contemporary world it is not only education but employment also which must be understood with reference to the notion of haves and and have-nots. Now, coming back to the issue of women, poverty and social exclusion, of course, there have been huge gains in human development, in women's voice and visibility, and also in creation of networks and in strengthening of women's agency. Yet, the risk of dying in childbirth in India is higher than in many of the other underdeveloped countries like Swaziland or Honduras. So, this clearly explains the kind of discrepancy that exists when it comes to women's health and also the issue of malnutrition. In fact, only half of all women in India receive 3 or more antenatal care visits, that is, visit to a doctor before the child is born. That is kind of a rarity, and invariably many women die due to complications arising during childbirth. Over 1/3 of Indian women are reported having experienced violence at some point of life, and as has been pointed out by NFHS data 2005 and 6, this again is a very disturbing trend, because this not only robs women of their agency but also makes them a victim of lack of self-confidence and self-esteem. Now, spousal violence is correlated also with poor access to maternal health and poor child health outcomes. Both these continue to impact lives of women, because if the child is born unhealthy or is undergoing malnutrition, it is the mother who is going to suffer the most, because whatever little resources the mother has at her disposal would be handed down to the child, and as a result the mother would deprive herself of whatever little she could have procured for her own sustenance. Now, if we consider women's labor force participation, women's visibility in the urban high-end labor market is much greater than it was a few decades ago. This is definitely a change that has come about, and this again can be correlated to the new liberal policies and the globalization trends that have emerged from 1990s onwards world over, and especially in India. However, huge diversity exists as far as women employment is concerned, and it is not a universal phenomenon in all the states, and in fact it is not only state wise differentiation that occurs, the differentiation also occurs in terms of caste, it also occurs in terms of tribal status. So therefore, the female disadvantage in India persists, especially in health, in education, in labor market, and also violence has serious effects not only in on their physical well-being but also on their mental health. Now, another very important and pertinent issue that has been discussed in the past as well in my lectures is the issue of missing girls. So, why more and more girls are missing? And here the issue of female infanticide, which was a very important issue during 19th and 20th centuries India, continued to remain even in 21st century. So, that is the tragedy, that how we have not really learned from history, and how the social religious reform movements which had started during 19th century continue to be as relevant today as they were in those times. Now, the census of 2011 shows a declining child sex ratio, which is again a very disturbing trend, and it is in fact worsening in states which initially had not experienced this problem. So therefore, even in a literate, highly literate state like Kerala, the problem of declining sex ratio is being felt. Earlier the problem was only limited to states like Punjab and Haryana, but now no more, and in fact Delhi, the so called upwardly mobile capital of country, also is not devoid of this problem. Rather, in Delhi, especially in many of the South Delhi districts, the problem is at its peak. And this again is symptomatic of wider deprivation that exists as far as women are concerned, and therefore the declining sex ratio, the issue of declining sex ratio must be at the center stage when we are talking about social exclusion, because unless and until the society, the polity and the culture devises they devise ways and means to deal with the problem, nothing can be done only with the help of rigid laws. Then another important observation that I would like to make here is, as you can all see on the slides, how this graph shows violence and poor health outcome, the interrelationship between them, and again the calculations are based on NFHS data 2005 and 6. So therefore this very relevant graph shows that how women who experience violence have worse reproductive health and child outcomes, and while those who are able to avoid these situations, they have much better health and even healthier babies. Now coming to the issue of policy responses as to what can be done to deal with these kind of discrepancies and these kind of issues of social exclusion and poverty, of course not one kind of response is sufficient. So while on the one hand the constitutional response is of the most important nature, and for this there are reservations in publicly funded education and public employment also, which needs to incorporate more marginalized groups, probably women, probably those communities who are not majority communities, but they are undergoing kind of exclusionary seclusion from the very beginning. Then of course the legal route is also very important, and laws against violence and exclusion, laws against atrocities and laws for equal opportunities are very important, and of course India has so many laws to achieve this. And then administrative policies are also very important, especially targeting health, nutrition, targeting mental health especially, and also social protection schemes, which are very important as far as the poor and the marginalized sections of society are concerned. But while all these have been in place, the real problem, the real challenge has been their implementation. So unless and until the issue of implementation is not resolved, and all the bottlenecks that exist in the path of implementation of these policies, nothing really is going to emerge. Now coming to the whole issue of voice and accountability, what is important is that the excluded groups, because they have low voice and lesser political clout, so therefore the state must be more open to their not only listening to their voice, but also giving them more opportunities, and the elite creamy layer must be deprived of the past privileges and the traditional benefits that they have been enjoying. So therefore the very fact that SCs, STs and women have registered lesser growth in specific areas like education, in public employment, therefore far more positive policies need to be devised, so that the implementation is also happening in a smoother way. So having discussed all these points, I shall now bring the lecture to a halt and then resume rest of the points in due course of time. Thank you.
With this note, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving us this session. Friends, you're requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we are going to discuss more. So be with us, keep watching us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on poverty and social exclusion, and in the previous session we tried to give you more and more of knowledge, and as promised here we are again for you to give you more. Friends, for the discussion on the topic we have with us in our studios Dr. Shruti Webb. Dr. Shruti Webb is Assistant Professor in Department of History, PGDAV Evening College, University of Delhi. Friends, if you wish to ask questions from Dr. Webb, then do call us to our toll-free number. Our number is 1800-110-430. I repeat, our number is 1800-110-430. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Dr. Webb, once again. Hello, ma'am. Welcome to the session.
Hello, Geetika. So, welcome back, friends. We were discussing the problem of social exclusion and how it has impacted not only marginalized castes, STs, but also women. Now, I would be discussing that how it is on the one hand, India is on a journey towards growth, becoming a global superpower, and how on the other hand there is the problem of poverty and social exclusion which is just not going away. So, while in the preceding lectures my focus was more on poverty and social exclusion, now it would be the focus would be more on growth and social exclusion. So, therefore, the examples also would be of the similar nature. Now, for the last so many years, India has been at the top of the league of the fast growing economies in the world, and its highly productive corporate sector, especially IT, and also management, research and development, despite all these spheres showing marked improvement and marked expansion, while from an economic point of view, India continues to fascinate the world through its cutting edge technology, but on the other hand, the problem of low average income and the problem of low per capita income continues to exist. So, therefore, there is a need to ask this question as to why this has been happening for so many decades. India has grown faster, in fact, since 1991. Suggesting that the whole idea of getting integrated with the global economy has paid off and it has given rich dividends. But then sadly, this has not really percolated down to the masses. An increasing loud criticism that has been heard in the recent past rather has been that the current high economic growth of India is not inclusive. So, inclusive is the new term that we all need to understand and we all need to incorporate in our discussion in today's lecture, because till now we were talking about exclusion and its reverse is inclusion, that is any kind of growth which happens, any kind of development which happens also incorporates, also impacts, also ensures that the benefits reach down to all the sections of society and they are not maneuvered or manipulated by a select few. Now, here I can share with you some data pertaining to child health and anemia. Now, obviously, when a country is on the path of modernization, when it is economic growth that we are talking about, the least that we expect from the from the economic graph of that country is that the children would be better fed and they would be enjoying good health and happiness. But as according to the NFHS data available for 1998-99 and 2005-2006, if we compare these two, then we would see that how the child anemia, which ranges from mild to moderate to severe, in fact has continued to exist, and in some cases it has rather increased as compared to the past trends. So, as the country is progressing economically, it is becoming a financial superpower. The problem of child anemia, anemic children not only being born but also being raised is just not going away. Then another interesting data that one can talk about is BMI, that is body mass index, which again is the ratio of weight to the in kilos to the square of height in meters, and BMI less than 18.5 is the cutoff conventionally that is associated with chronic energy deficiency. So, it is very important to have correct BMI, because unless and until the BMI is well within range, then the person would be energy deficient, which again is the reality in today's world, as especially in various parts of rural India. As you can see, the nutrition status of Indian adults as compared from 1975-79 to 2004 to 5. So, you can see that how BMI has steadily been declining, and this means that there are far more energy deficient people who are living in India today as they were than they were in the past. Now, if you compare BMI internationally, then and if we compare it with countries like Bangladesh and Nepal, then also India is not performing much better. So, while percentage of women with BMI less than 18.5, which is the minimum that one needs to be energetic, was 35.6 in India, whereas it was 24.4 percentage of women had lesser BMI in Nepal. So, you can see how the country is not able to compare the BMI standards with countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, and Tanzania, Rwanda, Ghana, etc., which is again a very disturbing trend. Now, coming to the aspect of child nutrition, the trend in child nutrition in India, again if you compare data from 1992 to 2005, again the data has been compiled by DREES in a source given in 2009. If we compare the weight for age, in 1992 it was 52, whereas by 2005 it became 45.9. Similarly, height for age also has been showing a declining trend, which shows that the problem of malnutrition is just not going away, rather it is increasing. So, therefore, the whole idea, the whole issue of inclusive growth is very important, and it needs to be incorporated in all the policy regulations that are being made, all the policy recommendations that are being made, and therefore, the 11th plan document made inclusive growth as part of its very important agenda. Here I would like to share a few lines that were composed by the great American poet Walt Whitman in the famous poem Leaves of Grass. In this, Whitman says, the genius of a country is not best or most in its executives or legislatures, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, not even in its newspapers or inventors, but always most in the common people. So, therefore, it is not really important, it is not really relevant to see how well the country is progressing, how many scientific achievements, advancements have been made, what all has been achieved, how many industries have been started, and what has been the GDP, unless and until the common people of the country are benefiting from whatever developments are being made. And it is the lives of the common people, the satisfaction, the happiness on their faces and food in their belly that is going to decide as to whether the country is really great. So, therefore, with these parameters and with these yardsticks, we need to measure our economic growth, and we need to revisit the growth graphs and try to bring about a change in whatever accomplishments or non-accomplishments that have been there. Now, here again another idea that I would like to share with the audience is what is the idea of India and what had been visualized by the constitution framers, by the visionaries. So, for example, Jawaharlal Nehru giving his famous address to the Constituent Assembly, delivering his famous address to the Constituent Assembly on August 14-15, 1947. He clearly referred to the peasants and the workers of India in his speech as being, the most important part of the common man who have to fight and end poverty and ignorance and disease. So, therefore, what was important was not only to bring about great economic achievements or to bring about great socio-cultural political achievements. What was important at that time was to listen to the demands and needs and fulfill the demands and needs of the common man, the peasants, the workers of India. And today we need to ask this question that have we really succeeded in that endeavor, and how well have we heard the plight of the common man, and how successful we have been in fulfilling their demands. Now, here again I would like to give a passing reference to Rawls, the law of maximum good for maximum numbers. So, the Rawlsian ideology is very important when we are talking about justice, when we are talking about inclusion, and we are talking about benefit of the masses. So, two conditions that are very important to be fulfilled if we have to bring about inclusion in society, polity and economy. Number one is that the growth does not leave behind large numbers. So, therefore, any kind of growth which is not inclusive enough, which does not really take into consideration the requirements of the common people, is of no use. So, therefore, for Rawls, the law of maximin was the most important criteria, that is principle of fair equality of opportunity. That is any kind of growth which also gives equal opportunity to the masses. Masses of course are to be related to the phrase maximin or maximum. Maximum means those who are in largest number, the common people. So, the maximin principle was a just criteria according to Rawls for the design of social systems proposed by the great philosophers including Rawls. According to this principle, the system should be designed to maximize the position of those who will be worst off in it. Now, the second important point to be noticed was that growth is characterized by an evenness across the economy, such that the widest range of our material needs are satisfied. So, here again what comes to what becomes important is that any kind of growth which is not really benefiting the masses in terms of material achievements of goods and services again is of no use, and it will not really bring about inclusion. So, therefore, these two have been absent from India, as we can all see from so many data analysis that I have shared with you, and also so many researches that have been conducted. And while on the one hand there has been a boom in the IT sector, on the other hand there has been a slowing down in the agricultural growth, and the masses are there in agriculture still. Almost 54 to 60% of Indians are still engaged in agricultural sector. So, when there is a downslide in that sector, or when the profit that is being earned out of that sector is not good enough, there are crop failures, there are rising suicides, and in fact there has been a declining return. The trend of declining return and increasing incidence to falling prey to loans and falling in the clutches of money lenders again is not a very welcome situation for the poor people of India. First, therefore, the growth must carry many with it, and secondly, it must satisfy the needs of the widest range of population, that is the common people, that is the masses of India. Only then we can talk about inclusion, only then we can talk about defeating exclusion for all time to come. Now, I would like to discuss here some features of the kind of growth that has happened in India after 1991, and we all must understand the process of globalization. I have delivered already a special lecture on globalization and neoliberalism and how it has impacted Indian economy. So, I would request the students to go back to the earlier series and refer to that, and then they would be able to understand this topic in greater detail. Anyways, we were talking about growth, how it has accelerated since 1991, and the significant feature of this growth is that there has been an expansion in manufacturing sector and of course in the service sector, that is the tertiary sector, while manufacturing is the secondary sector. So, while manufacturing is important not only for faster growth, but also as this growth is in new sectors like automobiles, high-end consumer durables, etc. But the question that is that can be raised is that are the emerging opportunities being distributed equally? Is the newly emerging private sector, about which I have given you so many examples as to how there exists deep bias with the kind of questions that are raised at the interview board pertaining to the family background. Is this private sector inclusive enough? So, the missing elements that continue to exist in this overall scheme of things of so-called development after 1991 are of course education, and especially higher education, then health as well as physical infrastructure. These are the missing elements in Indian economy. Of late, the government has started reducing costs, and it has started the trend of not subsidizing public utilities, not subsidizing social sector in order to deal with the crisis of the balance of payments, a trend that started in 1990s. So, therefore, the poor and the needy are being deprived of the kind of welfareism that was promised to them after independence. So, both history and economic theory they tell us that the broad policy of relying on the market is not sufficient to deal with the problem of exclusion. So, neither economic growth nor scientific developments or other kind of developments related to technology, economy, etc., or a very sound political system, none of this can really help in solving the crisis of exclusion. Most of the successful economies of the world belonging to Europe, Japan, America, they depend on mass public education. So, mass public education is the most important single factor that can help a country deal with the crisis of exclusion, deal with the crisis of illiteracy, poverty, malnutrition, etc. And therefore, it is in order to raise the general capability of the masses, this is something that must be done by the government of the day. That is, not diverting funds, not diverting resources from education away towards a greater a military expenditure or a greater economic infrastructure boost, but rather the most important expenditure by the government must be on subsidizing education, must be on promoting more educational institutions in the remote areas of the country. Now, in addition to this, we all must be aware of the importance of welfare policies and how various welfare provisions can help the poor masses in dealing with the day-to-day problems which they are not really able to on their own because of lack of resources. So, here again some examples from Western countries like UK, which had a national health scheme that provides free medical care of the highest order to all the citizens. Something of that sort is definitely being devised and planned by the present day government, but a lot more needs to be done, which also has some practical implications and which is not merely on paper. The economies of the EC also combine high levels of income with substantial welfare provisions. So, it is not as if only the rich countries can afford welfare provisions and only they can subsidize public utilities and social sector. Definitely with the right kind of planning and with the right kind of policy perspective, even developing countries can do that. The role of public provision of services is that it not only mitigates poverty, but it also provides a decent standard of life to the teeming millions, to the poor people who otherwise are not really able to afford good health and a balanced nutritive food. Therefore, it is important, a very important benchmark for inclusiveness. If we have earmarked inclusiveness as the most important principle, as was done during the 11th plan document, then these are the policy changes that the government has to undertake, because unless and until we incorporate these changes, the practical outcome would be zero. The theoretical reason for the belief that better government alone can bring about inclusiveness is investment on education and infrastructure, and health is also equally important. So, education, infrastructure, health, hygiene, and of course environment, these are some of the basic parameters that need to be taken care of, and the social rate of return on investing in these parameters is far higher than the private rate of return. So, here again everything cannot be measured in terms of profit and loss, because while the economy can give us more profit, of course any kind of economic expansion brings about more profit to the individuals, but here we are talking about social rate of return, that is a return that would be experienced by the people on the whole, the citizenship, and how the quality of citizens can improve once they are educated, once they are healthier, and once they are morally of sounder values. Now, coming back to the Indian scenario and trying to judge as to what has been happening, the policy focus has excluded social and physical infrastructure, again due to resource crunch and due to a number of restrictions that were imposed by the World Bank post 1990s as one of the preconditions that was there behind giving the loans in order to deal with the fiscal crisis in which India was in which India was entangled during 1989 onwards. So, therefore, while there has been a policy vacuum and a policy deficit since then, as far as public utilities are concerned, as far as education is concerned, public goods are not on the radar. As we find from so many problems that keep on cropping up time and again. So, for example, the flooding of Mumbai during the monsoon, which happens almost every year, then the outbreak of cholera, the outbreak of deadly diseases like chikungunya, dengue, malaria from time to time, and so many epidemics appearing from nowhere. So, how are they happening day in and day out, even in these times when India has become a global superpower which is on the path to greater success? The answer is definitely the inability, the incapacity of the government to spend more on health, hygiene, public utilities, etc. So, therefore, the public health is in a precarious condition, and unless and until this factor along with education is taken up as, you know, as a challenge and as a benchmark that has to be met in order to tread the path of success, and in order to bring about inclusive growth, things will not really be able to change in a positive way. Now, having discussed all these factors, now I would like to sum up what has been the nature of reforms since 1991. Nature of reforms pertaining to the economic growth. Since 1991, the economic policy environment in India has been liberalized, and there have been very positive results in manufacturing and service sector as a result of this change. However, the social and physical sectors have suffered at the hands of the private sector, and this is a sad reality which continues to rob the poor and the marginalized of whatever little resources they had earlier, and this definitely shows in the kind of data on malnutrition, in the kind of data on anemic children, in the kind of premature deaths at birth that I have shared with you. And a question that arises here is that where is India headed? Definitely, we need far more greater political consensus as well as social cohesion to deal with the problem, and a far greater debate is needed where economic policy making not only incorporates the demands and requirements of civil society and also takes into consideration the economic benchmarks that are needed by the country. So, having discussed these various factors, I shall now conclude the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so very much for giving precious inputs to the lecture. Friends, you are requested to write to us at info.cec@nic.in. This is the ID where you can post your questions as well as your feedback too. We are going to meet again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you once again.
Thank you.